Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. In the third and the final section of this panel, we move from concrete to steel and glass. Here, we immediately see the development of ultra-slim windows, not just in relation of a building, such as the workshop facade here at the Bauhaus, but steel and glass as an iconographic symbol of modernism. The prefabrication of facade element shifts a significant portion of the work away from the building site, from the construction site into the factory. The factory establishes itself as the new location for construction work. And this is the one aspect that Kathy Lloyd Thomas explores. And how should we understand the role of architects of this period as those who provide aesthetic, technical, and cultural justifications to support the expansion of the building product industry? Two questions that once again demand a change in perspective and thus take as their starting point our understanding of building as a co-production of material cycles, energy flows, and ecosystems. Kathy Lloyd Thomas is a visiting professor at Newcastle University. Her research focuses on gender, labor, materiality, and technology, as well as their intersections with architectural concepts, practice, and design. She is the author of the book Building Materials, Material Theory, and the Architectural Specification. Welcome, Kathy Lloyd Thomas. And your topic. Thank you.
Slightly strange experience of not being able to see the screen while you're talking, but anyway, thank you. Okay. So yeah, many thanks for the invitation to be here. Seeing Material Matters up on the screen in Kim's presentation, which was a conference that I organized in 2004, and thinking about the incredible work now that's being done around materials and building materials. It's an absolutely sort of changed situation, and I'm really in awe of the work we've been treated to today already. I really wanted to thank Regina for providing me in advance with digital access to this collection that we heard about from Simon of physical building fabric samples that is held here. And I looked through them in preparation for the paper. I'm no expert on the Bauhaus or the German context, because I hoped there would be a connection between the proprietary building products that I look at in my own research, which focuses on the British context in the interwar period, and the products used here at the Bauhaus. So some samples of fenestra Krittel windows, you can see one of them on the slide here, caught my attention. Although they were made here in Germany at the Düsseldorf factory, they were already under license from Krittels, the famous metal windows producer based in Essex, UK. So during the interwar period, there was an enormous escalation in the use and manufacture of branded building products. And at the same time, architects started naming them in their architectural specifications, which is what first drew my attention to them. And of course, once that had happened, sales were guaranteed. So if we look at the specification here, which specifies Rippelin paint, this is in fact for the house of the director of the Rippelin factory in the UK, where he's specifying his own product. My interest is twofold. First, in architects' various forms of relationship with these products and their manufacturers. And second, in the impacts of the factory becoming a key site for the building industry, as Gropius himself advocated. My approach is informed by the work of the architectural theorist Sergio Ferro, who argues that architectural techniques, and in particular, which I won't talk about today, but in particular what he calls separated design, which emerged with off-site drawing and the proto-architect at Gothic cathedral building sites, have provided some of the tools for transforming building into a capitalist enterprise. So we'll hear a bit more about Ferro's ideas later. Okay, so to Crittle's windows. So the Crittle's samples in the Bauhaus collection are not from the building, the Bauhaus building, I believe, which, as we've learnt earlier, used windows made by the Rostock-based company Nordracht. But they're from the terraced houses designed by Walter Gropius at the Turton housing estate, sites 2 and 4. The estate, and you all know much more about this than I do, was designed and built between 1926 and 28 and commissioned by the city of Dessau to help with the housing shortage for workers. So prior to our visit on Saturday, which I'm really looking forward to, it will be my first visit, I think that I might have identified the windows from Site 4, this longer basement window, and maybe the window at the rear on the kind of wing there. But I don't know yet with the Site 2, and I'm looking forward to finding that out on our tour. Of special interest to me is that Gropius recognized that existing crafts-oriented character of construction is gradually shifting towards large-scale industrial manufacture, and moreover, that he aimed to achieve the rationalization of construction processes under this primary consideration of reducing costs. But as we've already learned today, and I've learned much more about this image, which I put in without knowing what I was looking at really at the time, these buildings weren't prefabricated, rather they were made use of elements which could be assembled relatively quickly on site, including factory-made products like the Fenestra Crittall steel windows. As well as contributing to the speedy erection of housing at Turton, their use had other benefits. They enabled Gropius to materialize and demonstrate his architectural ideas, and they helped promote the company who manufactured them, as we see in these two ads. One for Crittall's windows, and the one on the right for Nordracht, which even has a direct endorsement from Gropius. What was good for Gropius and his pursuit of modern architecture was also good for the manufacturers. It's these mutual benefits and interests around cost, labor, architects and manufacturers, which are at the center of this paper. So where Fenestra Crittall benefited from Gropius selecting their products, the original Crittall's company took the initiative themselves to build housing that would showcase their windows. Crittall's director, Francis Henry, had got himself into the enviable position of being one of the witnesses to the government's reconstruction committee, who were drawing up the plans for house building and cottage prototypes after the First World War, for what would become known as the Tudor-Walters Report. Crittall thus had first-hand insight and as presumably input into their recommendations, which included that new housing be built using concrete and steel, and also that it should make use of standardized doors and windows, including the steel ones that Crittall's produced. Francis Henry proposed to the committee that Crittall's would build a pair of houses at the company's expense to demonstrate what was possible, and this is what we're looking at. These are two houses built at Cressing Road in 1918 in Braintree, which is also where one of Crittall's factories was located. Francis Henry's art school trained son, Walter Crittall, worked together on the design with an architect called Charles Quinnell, who, like Gropius, was a passionate advocate of standardization. Quinnell had a long relationship with the company and also with the Crittall family, for whom he had designed various houses over the years. They're in an eclectic range of styles. He was no modernist, but he did use Crittall's windows extensively in his designs, even before World War I, when apparently it was still rare for architects to specify them in domestic work. Quinnell is also interesting as a quasi-architectural theorist. He published opinion pieces in the architectural press, and with his wife Marjorie Quinnell, wrote and illustrated an extremely popular series of history books for children called Everyday Things in England. And they had three kind of main areas of focus: agriculture, textiles, and building. In the later version, Good New Days, which appeared in 1935, he actually thanks Professor Gropius for his advice on the building sections and illustrates the book with some of Gropius' schemes. Cressing Road was followed by Clockhouse Way in 1920, which was a larger development of houses to provide dwellings for Crittall's workers for rent. World War I had changed much for the factory workers. Not only was housing short, but during the war, the company had made munitions and learned techniques of mass production. And I'm really interested to know if this is one of the shifts that happens in Germany as well. Crittall's had started making bespoke metal windows in Braintree in 1884, and they made small steps towards standardizing their products shortly before the war, when Walter designed the first standardized or standard-sized casement. In 1907, Francis Henry had purchased the patent for a special joint from the original Düsseldorf Fenestra Company. Amongst its many advantages, increase in the daylight that would therefore come in, it also made the mass production of windows much easier. By the 1920s, the Fenestra joint had sort of made its way into a glossary of window-making terms that was passed around by workers in the factory. I've brought the copy of the publication. It's a lovely thing. And there's something really extraordinary about the fact that this patent and branded joint kind of sits amongst traditional window-making terms, as if it's long been part of the window-making craft. With the end of the war on the horizon, and well aware of the house building shortage that would follow, Crittall saw the benefit of mass producing his metal windows to meet the lucrative markets that would open up, both from private developers and from state-sponsored initiatives. In only one particular, he wrote, did our window business profit directly from our flutter with militarism. We had learned the art of mass production. It needed little acumen to deduce that in the near future, building components would be in very great demand. And indeed they were. Crittall switched to mass production processes, and the expansion of their window-making business locally and overseas was extremely successful. But I've been very interested to try and find out what factory life was behind the scenes. Testimonies from Crittall's employees, which you can find in their in-house magazines, but also some oral histories, paint a mostly favourable picture of working life under the governor, as Francis Henry was fondly known. There were nurses at each of the sites, the company organised dentist appointments and bank loans, and there were numerous social activities and entertainments, including evening classes. In 1927, the company owned a factory at Silver End, and you can see that in the bottom right corner, and that was to make window fixings, and this was especially work that would require less mobility, and it was aimed at recruiting disabled veterans, something which was supported by the British government, and even more so and more successfully, I think, in Germany, from what I've read. At the same time, oh, there you go, there's the inside the factory at Silver End. At the same time, staff records show how frequently employees were laid off when orders dropped, and then rehired when business picked up. The one factory where women were employed did the most dangerous and toxic work. They made leaded windows, and although workers were encouraged to wash after their shifts, there was no ventilation in the factory. Architects like Gropius and Quesnel, who supported standardization, were of course interested in these new forms of production. Indeed, we learn from an invitation to Gropius from Walter Crittall to visit the Braintree factory that the two men had met during Gropius's time in England in the 1930s. Gropius tends to see the benefits of mass production, while Quesnel is more circumspect in his 1935 book. Despite his close ties with Crittall's, or perhaps because of them, he is a keener observer of the de-skilling and division of labour that comes with mass production and with the price paid by factory workers. So I'll read his quote. There's been a great loss in the interest with which a man can take in his work. It tends to produce a race of helots, and the latter, chained to the moving assembly line like so many galley slaves, find liberty denied to them. The older methods were more democratic. The workman had a say and could do things his own way. There was a semblance of freedom. The new methods are those of a dictator and a slave state. So where Gropius sees rationalization, Quesnel is all too aware of the ramifications of mechanization for workers. But in addition, I think it's important to see factory production in relation to the construction site, which again is a point which Gropius made and something which you drew attention to in the introduction. Thank you for that. Perhaps it's not as much as Gropius claims here that the building products factory replaces the building site, but rather that it extends the sites of building. And in that case, building products become a means for the building industry to locate part of its activity within the factory system, where workers are better, more easily subordinated, de-skilled, and can be paid less. So Sergio Ferro argues that building has a special role in the economy. It's as one of the most lucrative sources of surplus labour and therefore also surplus value. But on site, building workers still retain some trade know-how and solidarity. They can and still do strike and negotiate for better conditions. Indeed, during the interwar period, the strength of construction unions presented a serious problem for local authority efforts to build state-subsidized housing. They struggled to find an affordable workforce, even with high rates of unemployment. Although there were experiments with prefabrication as one way to get around this problem, it didn't take off. The building products might have gone some way to reducing labour requirements on site, but more significantly, the factory workers who produced them could be paid as semi-skilled labourers rather than as skilled members of a workforce, a building workforce. And they didn't pose a direct threat to the wages of the site workers. So as a kind of quasi-building site, the factory was still a source of direct surplus labour for the building industry, and could keep the building industry productive and expanding even when on-site labour was limited. So this final section has sort of turned out to be quite short because of the limits of time, but I really wanted to include it in order to stress that during this period, architects were willing accomplices in ensuring that building products like Crittall's windows were used extensively. At the simplest level, as we've seen, architects were the specifiers of these products. Thus, manufacturers targeted their promotional materials in part at architects, usually very aware of the tastes of architects, and they knew how to persuade them. More proactively, Architects often work closely with manufacturers in the promotion of their products. For example, many companies hired them to design displays and show homes for trade fairs and exhibitions. And you can see in the image on the left that Crittals weren't especially good at the display stands. But perhaps a more beautiful example is provided here by Wells Coates Sunspan House. And if you're observant, you can see that there's a roof in the picture, and this was part of the Ideal Home exhibition. Visitors could take away a list of all the products that had been used in the making of the building. And as we've seen with Clockhouse Way and Cressing Road, architects also designed real buildings to showcase manufacturers' products. Thus, they created an image for them that made them acceptable both to other designers, builders, and to the general public. Crittals' most spectacular effort was their famous workers' village at Silver End, built to support the new window fittings factory that we've already seen. Silver End is most well known for its modernist houses, but Crittall hired a range of architects, ostensibly to bring variety to the village, but also to demonstrate, presumably, that their windows were suitable for any style of building. So you can see the more well-known houses designed by Thomas Tate on the left, and on the right, Quenel's kind of Georgian-style cottages. And at the bottom, a thatched barn that was brought to the site to be the church, and of course fitted out in Crittall's windows. So architects were also essential collaborators in the introduction of standardized products. Builders and architects had been used to ordering bespoke windows to suit their designs, but standard windows required them to change their habits, that is, to design and build around the window sizes that were available. Francis Henry was very clear that he needed to consult with and persuade architects to make this change, and also rather proud of his success with this. Not until window openings were standardized, he wrote, would we contemplate mass production, and I count it as no mean triumph that we were solely responsible in persuading architects in the building trade of the value of such standardization. So far, I haven't found details about the actual consultation process that took place here. I just know that Quenell was involved. But his public advocacy for the benefits of standardization may be the more significant factor here. Architects like Gropius and Quenell didn't simply use or promote standardized factory-made products like Crittall's windows. In the guise of architectural theory, they provided narratives that supported the escalation of their manufacture and use. In his essay, Concrete as Weapon, which might have been influenced from the title of one of Monika's texts that we saw earlier, Ferro argues that the widespread take-up of reinforced concrete, or béton armé, in the early 20th century in France, was in fact one means of dismantling the power of skilled carpenters and masons and their highly effective unions. And this kind of adds a third dimension of the sort of the uses of concrete to the pair that Kathleen mentioned earlier. The new materials disarmed the workers, Ferro writes, by taking the place of those materials that had underpinned crafts based on traditional know-how. With their enthusiastic designs and polemics in favor of this new material, Ferro argues, architects provided the ideology for this transformation. If building products enabled an expansion of the building industry, a kind of back door behind which construction unions wielded no power, then architects provided both practical and ideological support for the expansion of the use of proprietary products in building. Perhaps we can add the rise of building products to the list of weapons Sergio Ferro uncovers. In this battle, with building products as weapon, manufacturers like Crittall's were the victors, with architects at their side, while those doing the labor of producing our built environment, and this was especially stark in Monika's presentation, who are normally invisible in histories of architecture, lost out.